Welcome back to the deep dive. Our world today is completely obsessed with speed.
It really is.
We're all measured by our reaction time. You have to reply to that email immediately. You have to iterate instantly.
If you don't strike while the iron is hot, you've missed your chance. That's the conventional wisdom.
Exactly. But what if sometimes the most profound, the most devastatingly effective strategic move you can make is just choosing to do nothing?
It's the ultimate counterintuitive strategy. It flies in the face of, well, every modern instinct we have.
Right. We equate inertia with failure, delay with weakness. If you hesitate, you lose.
But today we're diving deep into some source material, a really powerful narrative that argues the exact opposite. It argues that calculated delay, that silent observation, isn't just wise. It's actually braver than immediate action.
And our mission here is to really understand the mechanics of this high-stakes patience. We have this story of a young prince who is publicly, and I mean violently, insulted by a rival king.
And the pressure to retaliate instantly would have been immense.
Immense.
Yeah.
But instead, he chose silence. So we're unpacking this idea that waiting is braver than acting, and really trying to figure out how he survived that wait.
You know, for anyone making high-stakes decisions, whether that's in your career, in a negotiation, maybe running a company, understanding how to weaponize patience instead of just succumbing to that pressure to react is one of the most valuable lessons you can ever learn.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So let's set the scene. You have this young prince. Maybe he's ambitious, maybe a little insecure, but he desperately needs to establish his authority.
Right, and the rival king knows exactly how to exploit that vulnerability.
He delivers this public insult that's just designed not just to humiliate the prince, but to force him into a rash, costly, and probably unwinnable war.
It's a psychological game. He's using reputation as the weapon. He knows that the second that insult is delivered, the prince enters this massive crisis of expectation.
The entire foundation of his legitimacy is suddenly at stake.
Absolutely, because everyone expects the visceral, bloody response of an offended ruler.
And you can just feel the heat in that room. The sources describe the court as immediately fracturing into these noisy factions. The ministers, they're trained to solve problems with urgency.
So they're whispering, debating troop movements, preemptive strikes.
They want war, or at the very least, a highly detailed, devastating verbal counterattack. Something, anything now.
And this creates that universal challenge that every leader faces. That overwhelming fear of appearing weak if you don't react instantly.
The soldiers were restless, eager to defend their leader's honor.
And crucially, the sources really emphasize that the general public, since they lack the context, they completely misinterpreted the lack of response. They mistook his silence for weakness.
That pressure is just enormous. It's what drives a CEO to launch a premature counterproduct after a competitor's announcement.
Or what makes someone escalate an argument when they know deep down they should just walk away. It's that primal need to defend your turf instantly.
Yeah, and the prince had to fight that primal urge inside himself while simultaneously managing this external perception.
It's a terrifying tightrope walk. Every single person, his allies, his enemies, his own people, they all expected inertia to equal surrender. The conventional wisdom screamed that he had to fight now or be seen as a coward forever.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. He absorbed the insult. He made no retaliatory moves. The world expected war, but he gave them nothing.
Just silence.
But this silence, it wasn't passive. It wasn't him freezing up.
Yeah.
What did the prince actually do over those crucial silent months instead of fighting?
He fundamentally transitioned his posture from defense to a kind of high-level active offense. His silence became this highly disciplined form of intelligence gathering.
So it wasn't doing nothing.
Not at all. He recognized that the greatest immediate danger wasn't the insult itself, but the reaction to it. So by choosing not to react, he freed up all of his resources and his own mind for observation.
And the sources give us a detailed playbook on what he was observing. It wasn't just, waiting for some divine intervention.
No, he was charting the inevitable trajectory of his opponent's character flaws. He realized those flaws were structural weaknesses he couldn't create, but that he could absolutely exploit.
Okay, so what was the first thing he focused on?
First, he looked at the rival king's relationships with his allies. Now, had the prince attacked, those allies would have united against him.
Of course, a common enemy.
Exactly. But by waiting, the prince watched the rival king's arrogance start to manifest. We learn from the notes that the rival king, feeling victorious after the insult, began demanding excessive tribute and canceling favorable treaties with his smaller neighbors.
Wait, so the rival king interpreted the prince's silence as a win and immediately started overreaching.
Precisely. The insult was a test the prince passed by doing nothing. The rival king saw that lack of response as an invitation to indulge his worst tendencies: greed, impatience, an inflated sense of superiority.
And the prince was just, gathering proof that this rival was a destabilizing and untrustworthy partner.
He was building a case.
But hang on, this sounds incredibly risky. If this strategy fails, the cost is total ruin. How did the prince manage the reputation risk during this waiting period when his own ministers and soldiers were questioning his courage?
That is the essential difficulty of the strategy. It required immense internal conviction. His outward silence needed to be accompanied by clear, private communication to his inner circle.
So he didn't leave everyone in the dark.
No, he likely kept his key loyalists informed, showing them the intelligence stream. He was providing an alternative narrative. The enemy is defeating himself. Our job is to observe the pattern and ensure our own house is stable. He was substituting that immediate public validation with long-term strategic trust among his key people.
So he was actively demonstrating to his internal supporters that his patience was producing tangible, strategic results while just letting the public grumble.
Yes, and that brings us to the second major thing he watched: the internal cracks in the rival kingdom. This is where his patience really compounded. The rival king was impatient. He was constantly demanding rapid, visible results to feed his ego. The sources detail how the king pushed through these massive, poorly planned infrastructure projects, diverting crucial state funds and demanding immediate returns.
Which naturally led to incompetence and corruption.
Without fail. Because the king was arrogant, he ignored expert advice. Because he was impatient, he rushed the timelines. And the prince's observers, they recorded the resulting failures: supply lines breaking down, local governors skimming funds.
And the public becoming increasingly disgruntled by the economic mismanagement.
While spurred by the king's own haste.
What's fascinating here is that the prince realized that patience reveals truths that haste hides. Had he reacted immediately, he would have been completely distracted by the conflict itself.
Right.
But by waiting, he allowed the rival's internal vulnerabilities, his arrogance, his impatience, his greed, to become self-fulfilling prophecies. He allowed the kingdom to rot from the inside out.
It's the difference between trying to break down a fortified wall with brute force versus waiting until the enemy's commander decides to use the foundation stones to build a vanity statue in the town square.
Patience was the necessary tool to reveal that the foundation was rotten and, in fact, was actively being dismantled by the enemy himself.
The initial insult was just a pebble thrown at the prince. The true ticking clock was the rival king's own destructive nature. The prince understood that power based on ego and impulsive action is a self-destructing mechanism. You don't have to fight it, you just have to give it enough rope.
And the inevitable result over those subsequent months of quiet observation was exactly that. The prince never had to launch an invasion.
Never. He didn't have to raise an army or drain his treasury. The rival kingdom simply collapsed internally.
The sources are chillingly specific about the mechanism of that failure. It says the kingdom fell under its own greed.
That's the quote. The allies he'd alienated refused to help during the internal unrest caused by the economic collapse. The citizens, tired of the rash, self-serving governance, refused to defend the regime.
It's the ultimate low-cost victory. The rival king's own arrogance became the most powerful weapon against him.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the final, measured action of the prince completes the lesson. He didn't step in as a conquering brute.
No, he stepped in not with force, but with fairness.
Right. He used all that intelligence he'd amassed to stabilize the region, redistribute resources justly, and bring the corrupt leaders to account.
And this is where the strategic brilliance really compounds into a massive reputational win. The very same people who had mocked his silence months earlier, fearing he was weak,
now praised his profound wisdom. He had leveraged his silence into peace, into victory, and into the reputation of a sage and just ruler.
He achieved the maximum possible outcome, not just victory, but enduring legitimacy, at the minimum possible cost.
And the lessons learned here are just timeless. Power rooted in ego, an immediate reaction is high cost and perishable. It burns out quickly. But patience, the ability to accrue insight and allow external factors to follow their natural consequence, that patience compounds.
Yeah.
It generates long-term sustainable value that far exceeds any temporary gain from haste.
So let's bring this wisdom directly back to you. When you are faced with that moment of crisis, the provocation, the market dip, the stinging critique that demands an immediate emotional response, there are three crucial insights from the prince's deep dive that you should try to internalize.
First, silence is not surrender. It is a calculated and often superior strategy that buys you the only two things that matter in a crisis: time to think clearly and the space for your opponent to reveal their own hidden flaws.
Second, patience reveals truths that haste hides. Only by stepping back and allowing the immediate noise to dissipate can you see the structural weaknesses of the situation or of your opponent. I mean, immediate action locks you into a very limited two-dimensional view of the problem.
Right. And third, time is the greatest ally of the wise. It allows the laws of consequence, the arrogance, the greed, the poor judgment of others to do their inescapable compounding work for you. You're moving from a reactive state to an almost prophetic position where you anticipate the enemy's collapse rather than just defending against their attack.
It fundamentally changes how we understand power.
Yeah.
True strength isn't the ability to strike instantly. It's the capacity to absorb the blow and use the shockwave to gather intelligence.
You know, this raises an important question that pushes beyond strategy and really delves into personal conviction. If the people praised the prince's wisdom only after his success was undeniable,
Right, after the fact.
what internal certainty allowed him to endure their public scorn, the whispers of cowardice, and the disbelief of his closest advisors when his silence was initially just mistaken for weakness?
How do we cultivate that deep, unwavering self-belief, that conviction in our long-term plan, when the world and our own anxiety is demanding we abandon prudence and just act immediately?
That, I think, for the modern learner, is the greatest challenge of strategic patience.
Something to mull on until our next deep dive.
We'll talk to you soon.